So let's kick things off. I would like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Tidey. She is a professor of psychology at Brown University. Doctor, come on in. How are you doing today?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So this is quite fascinating. You have been working on research for quite some time, and you are with Brown University's
Center for Alcohol and Addiction Studies.
Center for Alcohol and Addiction Studies. And you've been doing research for quite some time that has actually impacted the FDA's decision to reduce nicotine within cigarettes. Tell me just a little bit about the work that you do. Broad question.
Okay, well, broad. So I'm in the Center for Alcohol and Addiction Studies, where my work is primarily focusing on smokers with psychiatric illness and trying to help them quit. So you may not be aware, but most of the cigarettes, or at least close to half of the cigarettes smoked in the United States, are smoked by people with psychiatric disorders. And even though smoking rates are going down in the general population, smoking rates in people with psychiatric illness are stagnating. They're not really going down, and we don't really know why that is or what to do about it. So I don't want to imply that people with psychiatric disorders can't quit. They actually do quit, but they don't quit as easily as people without psychiatric disorders. So that's really what my lab has been concentrating on for the past 20 years or so.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of the overall
That's the overarching
focus.
thing.
Okay. So that's kind of in the background. Now, talk to me a little bit about the research that you did. I believe you completed or were working on it in 2015 that has really focused on this one issue that helped the FDA make this decision, and we'll kind of look into that decision overall.
Yeah, so we're really excited that our work has helped to provide the science base for the FDA to go forward with their intention to reduce the nicotine content of cigarettes. We were one of 10 laboratories across the country that was involved with this very major study. And what we did is we enrolled 840 people in this study. They were all smokers who were not trying to quit at the time of the study. They were randomly assigned under double-blind conditions, meaning they didn't know what they got and we didn't know what they got, to cigarettes that were either their usual brand of cigarettes. So some people got, lucky people got like their usual Marlboros or whatever, free of charge for 6 weeks. And the other people got cigarettes that were research cigarettes with different levels of nicotine content. And again, they're unlabeled. They didn't know, we didn't know when we were handing them out what was in these cigarettes. And so we asked our smokers to just switch to these cigarettes, study cigarettes, for 6 weeks. And we measured obviously their smoking behavior, their dependence, their mood, their withdrawal symptoms, their craving. We asked them questions like, how much would you pay for cigarettes? We measured depression. We looked at how hard they smoked, so you can actually put the cigarette in a little like handheld gadget and look at how hard you puff. Because there's a concern that if you reduce the nicotine content, that people will puff harder to try to get more nicotine out. We looked at biomarkers of nicotine exposure and tobacco toxicant exposure, basically anything you could think of that might happen, positive or negative, with these cigarettes. And what we found is that after 6 weeks, the people who had been on the very low nicotine content cigarettes had reduced their smoking rates relative to the people on the higher nicotine cigarettes by about a third, 30 to 40%, something like that. They were less dependent, they had less craving. Even when they abstained overnight, they had less craving, and they were more likely to make a quit attempt after the study ended. So it was really exciting. This was obviously a large study, and and I want to emphasize there have been other studies also around the country, but this really, I think, provided the backbone for the FDA to go forward with their intention.
And so, and you said it was an 8-week study.
Yeah, well, there was a baseline week. So but the period of time in which people were on the study cigarettes was 6 weeks.
Okay. So what I find, this is just absolutely fascinating to me, and what I think is really important for people to know when looking at this, just for overall, is people were more likely, who had that lower nicotine, were more likely to quit going out of the study, and you said you did not take people who wanted to quit. Going into it, they did not want to quit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why was that important to you?
We excluded people who were interested in quitting or trying to quit because we were giving them cigarettes for 6 weeks. So it would be unethical to say, oh, you want to quit? Here, have some free cigarettes. That would certainly undermine their intention to quit. And so they were excluded from the study. But I have to say, even among people who tell you they don't, they weren't trying to quit now, but most smokers do eventually want to quit. So that one thing that's really important about this strategy is it could really help people who want to quit, help them to succeed in quitting. And it would have broad reach. So it's not just people who sign up to be in a particular treatment study, but it would broadly reach, like I said, our smokers with psychiatric disorders, our low-income smokers, people who have trouble getting access to treatment, getting into appropriate treatments. So that's why we're really excited about the policy.
So, I have so many questions about this. So those were some positive impacts that you kind of mentioned. Could there be negative impacts, or did you find any negative impacts in your research?
There's the potential. Things we were concerned about were obviously withdrawal symptoms. People who experience transient withdrawal symptoms, that could be okay, but what if there were protracted and very severe withdrawal symptoms? We were concerned about depression. So smokers who come in, as I said earlier, a lot of smokers have depressive disorders, anxiety disorders. What if that gets worse? So smokers will tell you, not just smokers with psychiatric disorders, but smokers in general tell you that the reason why they smoke, the primary reason is it makes their mood better.
Yeah.
Improves negative mood is the number one importance rating for smokers for why they smoke. So there could be something to this. If you take away cigarettes, will depression get worse? Will anxiety get worse? And we're looking at studies now. We're doing studies now to look at people with schizophrenia to see if they might get worse. So far, we do not see any evidence of that. But we looked in the large study with 840 people that I mentioned before. One thing we looked at and published on is we took people who were higher in depression at the beginning of the study, and we compared them to people who were lower in depression at the beginning of the study, and we compared how they responded to, do they decrease their smoking rates equally, do they have any changes in depression, and in fact the people with elevated depression symptoms reduced their smoking rates, their cigarettes per day just as much, and they did not have increases in depression. So that's really, it really gives us a lot of optimism about, rolling this out, how it could be helpful.
So as we move forward in the overall policy that the FDA is looking at, it's far-reaching. It's several years to implement these things. What have you seen that, kind of going over and reading this, what have you seen so far?
Well, broadly, so not just our study, but broadly.
Yeah, kind of like what? Yeah,
I've seen. One thing that we hear about is concerns about, well, if you do this, there'll be a black market for cigarettes. What about kids? Maybe they'll perceive cigarettes as being safer, and they'll be more likely to start. So one thing, we're looking at support for the policy among people who've been in the study to make sure that, well, just to check to see what kind of how smokers would respond to this. We are, in the back of our minds thinking of the black market. Would there be a black market like, everybody remembers Prohibition and what happened? But, thinking of this as a continuum of risk, if the FDA were to roll this out while e-cigarettes are available, we think it's more likely that people would switch to electronic cigarettes than searching out, cigarettes from other countries that might be higher in nicotine. So there are a lot of, there are a lot, not to give anyone any ideas, but there are a lot of considerations, and obviously the FDA, as you mentioned, this is going to be kind of a protracted process. They're going to be hearing from the public, from scientists. They're going to have to weigh all these concerns, but the exciting thing is that they took the first step. It might be a long process. It might, tobacco companies will certainly fight back. But you got to start every journey with a single step. So here we go, and it's exciting.
Do you foresee, just looking at the research that you've done and the science that you've seen with it, I mean, could there be a possibility of maybe multifaceted nicotine levels in cigarettes?
Well, you mean available on the market at the same time?
Yeah.
Well, we know if they're available on the market at the same time that people will choose higher nicotine cigarettes.
Yeah. So why even put it out there?
So there were lower nicotine cigarettes on the market at one time, and they did not succeed.
Yeah.
So that's why it has to be a mandate, basically, because you're not going to, if you're reaching for, should I buy my Marlboros or these lower nicotine cigarettes, people are not choosing the low nic cigs. Now, another consideration would be, should the FDA try to reduce nicotine all at once, or should they do it gradually?
Yeah.
And there was a large study that was just completed and will be published pretty soon, probably within the next 6 months, looking at just that question. And I don't actually know the answer to that question, but it's a very reasonable question. So stay tuned on
that. Your thoughts on, so for these, I don't know if you know what was in them, what wasn't in them. If they're taking out a certain amount of nicotine, does anything else get replaced in cigarettes? I mean, is there anything else that goes in there to supplement that?
Yeah. So one thing we don't know, and animal studies have tried to model, is you can imagine if you're a tobacco company and you're, and the government's going to say, okay, now we're going to reduce the ingredient in your product that makes your product addictive.
Yeah.
That you might want to go, what else can I change? Now, nicotine, part of the Tobacco Control Act is nicotine products need to go through the FDA now to get, so they couldn't sneak something in there. But they certainly might want to tweak ingredients,
change the taste of it. Like Coke is going through this whole Coke Zero. They're changing the flavor. I mean, could companies, like cigarette companies,
there are thousands of chemicals in cigarettes.
Yeah.
Some of those chemicals are also part of, increase addiction to cigarettes. So it's not a crazy idea to think that tobacco companies might try to do that. And, we're always trying to play catch up with what they're doing because they have a lot more resources than scientists. But, so it's possible, certainly. But like I said, now that the FDA has, regulatory authority over cigarettes and other tobacco products, that they presumably would find out if this were happening and then be able to test why are tobacco companies doing this and what are the effects of those cigarettes.
Okay. So what are your thoughts as we move forward? What do you think? Because you've done this research, you've said that smokers didn't really notice a difference from what it sounds like.
Well, they do notice a difference.
They do notice a difference?
They rate the cigarettes as less satisfying.
Oh.
They don't like them as much. Not surprising. They don't get the throat hit. They don't get, which is like a conditioned reinforcing effect of nicotine, basically. They don't love them the way they love their regular cigarettes.
Okay,
so I don't want to say that there'll be no difference to your cigarettes. I imagine that once, tobacco companies start manufacturing their cigarettes, I'll use Marlboro again as an example.
Okay.
Once Marlboros are low nicotine, they will be better tasting than the crummy government cigarettes that we tried. So I imagine they'll be able to mitigate some of those effects, but they are, smokers were not quite as happy. So what do you think some takeaways for people out there who are smokers who hear this and think, I don't want you to mess with my product? What do you think is some helpful advice for people out there? I mean, there are a lot of people that are addicted to these products that think either one, I do want to get help, but two, I don't want you to mess with my product. Well, I mean, that's an entirely reasonable opinion.
Right?
But I would say that, again, that most smokers do want to quit. They know in their hearts they need to quit. They just can't quit. And, smokers try to quit, they enter treatment, but relapse rates are really, really high. So I think, and like I said, so in our study, we looked at people who had been in the study, who had used these cigarettes for 6 weeks, and asked them if how much they supported a nicotine reduction policy, and overwhelmingly people supported it. there was 2-to-1 support over opposition. And then there was a pretty large group of we don't know. So people are not quite clear on what the role of nicotine is in cigarettes. They think if you take the nicotine out, that they become safer cigarettes. That's not true. Nicotine is the addictive, it's like caffeine in coffee. It's what makes you hooked, but it's not what kills you. So if you're puffing away at low nicotine cigarettes at the same rate, it's still, you're still at higher risk for cardiac disease, for lung disease, for cancer. But it counts on you reducing, over time, reducing your smoking rates and then eventually quitting. That's the basis for the policy. But yeah, so anyway, like I was saying, so we asked people how much they would support the policy, and they were very supportive. So we do think that people, by and large, will be supportive. The FDA does need to do some public education about why they're doing this, about the fact that smoking kills 500,000 Americans, 480,000 Americans per year, costs the U.S. $300 billion per year, so it's hugely important to do something about this. And now that we have other nicotine products, like I said, like electronic cigarettes, that smokers might find more reinforcing, the hope is that they'll switch over to those other products and then eventually quit.
So are you doing any research on those products at Brown?
We are about to. So
okay.
we're the study that we finished.
Real interesting work begins
we're about
too,
to know.
right?
Yeah. So we want to know what happens when you combine reducing the nicotine content of cigarettes with making e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes, available. And we're also looking at the nicotine content of those products and flavors in those products.
Yeah.
So this is, again, part of that big group that was part of the 2015 study. And at Brown, what we're going to be doing is a study that my colleague Suzanne Colby and I are going to start soon, and Rachel Cassidy, who's also been studying reduced nicotine content cigarettes in teens, to look at the combination in teens. So we're not giving teenagers, cartons of cigarettes. We're doing it just in the lab for some feasibility reasons as well as ethical reasons. And but it's our starting point to see. So if we can reduce the nicotine content of cigarettes and make e-cigarettes available, can you shift behavior over? Or even better if they would just abstain from both products.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Fascinating public health talk right now as well, and all being done right here.
I know.
In Rhode Island, right in our backyard at Brown University. So interesting to get your perspective on that. And this has kind of been your life's work, is doing this research and being put into policy form in someone. You've kind of helped shape this. What's your feeling on that?
So it's very exciting to be part of that. I mean, I started out as in graduate school, I ran rats. I was a rat researcher studying cocaine and how stress might make you more susceptible to cocaine use. And then after graduate school, I switched to studying humans in the lab. Like I said, smokers with psychiatric disorders. I bring them into my human lab along with heavy smokers without psychiatric illness, and I try to figure out why is it that smokers with psychiatric disorders have so much trouble quitting. And then more human clinical trials, and now their policy. So I've really gone the whole gamut. And I never in my life thought that our work would be influencing policy. So it is. It's tremendously exciting for all of us who, basic, like everyone on that project, basic behavioral pharmacologists, and with the potential to influence policy. And but that's how you want policy to be influenced, by scientists, not by a bunch of lawyers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you would hope that science would be driving it when you're talking about such a potentially big change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your perspective and bringing forward. We'll put links online to the work that you have done. Really interesting, and look forward to hearing more about your continued efforts.
Thanks.
And getting that knowledge behind that. So, Jen Tidey with Brown University, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating.
It's been really fun. Thank you.
So, thank you so much for joining me. I really